G4C Northwest's third instalment of this webinar series on a glimpse behind the hoarding. The idea behind this webinar is just to give people in the region across the Northwest an idea of some of the projects going on, especially while so many people are working from home. It's just, to be honest, been quite nosy seeing what's happening. It's really good to get an insight on all these big projects across the region. My name's Freya Woodward. I'm chair of the committee for the Northwest, and I'm a trainee project manager at Arcadis based in Manchester. So first of all, it would be great if we could just, if you're not one of the speakers, if you could just switch your videos off and go onto mics, switch your mics off, go onto mute, just to improve the bandwidth for the speakers. And then I'm going to hand over to Ryan Southern from Kier, who's going to talk to us about First Light. Thanks, Ryan.
No problem. So hi everyone, I'm Ryan Southern. I'm the lead manager of this project, which is First Light Pavilion at Jodrell Bank. I was just showing the images before, but if you're not too sure of where Jodrell Bank is, it's in Macclesfield, and it has a lot of rich history. It's a World Heritage Site. This telescope was built back in 1957. And ever since then, the infrastructure around has slowly developed. This is a new car park, a new visitor centre. It's been developing over the past 3 or 4 years. And now we're coming to our new project, which is where we just set up here for 18 months. We started back in January. And I've just done a progress video that shows when we started back in January to where we are today. So if that could just be played, and then I can walk onto site and show you the job.
Just bear with me.
Okay, is that finished? Can everyone still hear me?
Yep, we can still hear you.
Brilliant, brilliant. Okay. So as the project manager, I've been able to set the job up for about 6 months prior to starting on site. It's actually owned by the University of Manchester, and it's a University of Manchester framework project. So it's a two-stage bid. In the first stage, we won based on prelims, and then the second stage is where you take it from there. And you basically design the remaining sections of the stage, stages 3 to 4, if you're aware of how that works. And then we actually bring it to site. We started in January, and from there, we've basically been asked to actually talk about a few issues that have been on the job. Mainly the thing for us is COVID. So as you can imagine, the impacts that we've had through from April, May and June. We have still been able to work, and we have, because we are in the middle of a field, been able to progress and catch up with time, because we're about 2 weeks behind when we were doing a lot of the works in the ground. And then the weather came, as everyone's aware, during lockdown, and we were able to progress quite fast. 2 meter social distancing was one of the key things that we had to work with, and along with that, there was a lot of risk assessments and method statements that got put in place. But what you're seeing here today is a lot of hard work from a lot of different people that have got to this stage, which is on program, looking at pouring the concrete dome, which you can just see above. I'll turn it a bit better here. And this concrete dome is going to be happening at the end of September, October. I believe the claim to fame on this job is a concrete dome has not been poured in the last 25 years. So it's a bit of a high-profile specialist project that we're working on here. Once it's actually finished, I haven't explained what it is. It's going to be a museum. Hard to believe, but if you see some of the images in that video, it looks a bit like the Teletubbies home. And there's a grass mound which goes right over the top of this. But in essence, it's just a concrete frame that will be hosting events, conferences. It's a bit of a museum inside to basically talk about all the history of the telescope and Jodrell Bank as a site itself. There's also toilet facilities, offices, a cafe area. So all things like that you can actually read on the Jodrell Bank website. But I don't really want to go into too much information on that. I was more going to show you today just to see what it's like, as it says in the webinar, behind the hoardings. And this is where we are today. Live footage of people working on our site. We've got two crawler cranes, which are 80-ton crawler cranes. I don't know if you can catch up here and just see. It's got a 43-meter jib, 33 meters plus 10-meter fly jib. And there's two of these cranes that can then reach right the way across to supply the materials to the dome. And just about making the background there, the telescope. And I'll walk my way around. Hopefully the footage is okay. The internet connection's coping. But we have 60 to 70 people working on the job. We're at week 34 of a 78-week project. The value to Kier is about £13 million, and the overall value to the scheme itself is 20. I'm just going to make my way up. Just to give you some good views of where we are right now with the crane. It's working away. So the hardest part and the most technical part of this job is the actual dome that you can see here right now. So it's very different. My background, I probably should have explained that before. I did civil and structural engineering as a degree at the University of Liverpool. And from there, I basically have worked on all different types of jobs, but the best ones that I prefer are the concrete ones, just a bit more interesting for me personally. And this one's right up my street. The dome itself, anyone that knows the technical side of things here, is a 200 thick roof, concrete roof, with 2 layers of steel. That's what you're seeing here. And it all works, because it's a dome, it all works as a certain diaphragm. So you can load it in one part and it will distribute the load to other areas. And let's just come up and show you onto the top. You get some really good views. Once this is all finished and all concreted, we have, like I said before, topsoil that comes right the way over the top and covers this as a grass mound. And the general public will be able to walk up and over here. So it's going to be a good asset to have to make the experience here at Jodrell Bank that more interesting. So we've got gardens over there at the back, the playground area, and that's over into the east. In the north will tend to be where the services areas are, for when they're going to be providing the food and supplies to run the actual building itself. Over in the west, you have a good view of the telescope. You'd be standing here at this point here, which is about 8 meters high off the floor. And then in the south, where the sun mainly is during the day, we actually have a sundial or a meridian line that will be shining through the concrete walls and forming a sundial on the actual floor to give you a sort of, hopefully, the idea of the time. It all relates back to astrophysics, and that's sort of the very science-based here. You have normally, pre-COVID, we had a lot of school visits, and they had arts and crafts. A lot of the centre mainly works around that side of the educational part more so than the leisure. So the sector that we are working under here is education and leisure. So I am conscious of time because I've got a 15-minute slot. But I just wanted to give you that view behind the hoardings that you won't see if you come here as a visitor in the car park of how we're actually working at the minute. But you can come down at certain sections of our progress on site, mainly in, I think it will be October. And you can come and see the current status of what you're probably seeing here today, just a bit progress a bit more. So I'll probably have to leave it there. 15 minutes is quick. Sorry, guys. Is that okay?
That was great. Thanks, Ryan. And it's such an interesting project. I think a lot of people don't know the whole background too. So it was really good getting an insight and a successful live walk around as well, which is the first time we've done that, and it worked really well. So thank you.
I'm glad the internet connection stayed up actually. Yeah.
We're going to leave a little bit of time for questions at the end of our next presentation for both projects, if that's all right, Ryan, if you mind just hanging on for a bit.
Yeah, no problem. I'll stay up here on the top of the dome. I'll give you another view later if you want.
Brilliant, thank you. But now I'm going to hand over to Paul Taylor and Josh Wilkinson from WSP, who are going to talk about their role on land quality for the Transpennine Route Upgrade.
No problem. Okay, I'll just share my screen now, so if anyone can just let me know when they can see it.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, perfect. Unfortunately, there is no videos or music in this one, so I feel a bit upstaged by Ryan. I think, Paul, if we had videos, it'd just be staring at a desk all day or being chased by angry homeowners.
Yeah, that's right.
Unfortunately, we don't have any of that. Okay, we'll get straight into it. So the agenda for today is we'll give a brief overview of the scheme and our involvement, an overview of the TWAO process, WSP and land services, what that entails, and then just 3 or 4 challenges that we found today. But first, some introductions. So myself, I'm Josh Wilkinson, and I am the project manager at WSP. I've been in the role now for just over 12 months, and I was given the TRU project on my second day of joining WSP, and told to go and make a success of it. And it's not quite finished yet, so today is quite a good reflection point for me to see if I'm on track for that. My background originally though is in defence aerospace, where I began my career as an 18-year-old PM apprentice on a level 6 degree apprenticeship. Within that time, I worked on some pretty exciting projects, including the Typhoon aircraft support for the Austrian Air Force. I managed a portfolio of research and development projects for all the future defence equipment. And I also supported the development of some supply chain software for the US Air Force. All of this whilst also trying to do a degree part-time at Lancaster Uni. So it was a bit of a busy 5 years. But these days, I manage the land services element of infrastructure projects. which includes the TRU project, which is what we're going to discuss today. And also I'm managing the HyNet project, which some of you may or may not be aware is the new hydrogen energy and carbon capture project based around the Cheshire Merseyside area.
So I guess I'll make my introductions now. Cheers, Josh. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to speak about TRU today. My name is Paul Taylor, and I'm a land consultant at WSP. I've had this role for just over 3 years, and I've been working on TRU since its infancy, really. And I do intend to see it through to its submission, which will ultimately provide me with some invaluable project experience going into other projects in the future. I've been working at WSP since graduating from university, as I enrolled on the graduate programme. During my time at WSP, I've worked on 2 projects really, HS2 Phase 2B and TRU. HS2 was the first project I started on, which ultimately gave me a really strong foundation, as it's one of the UK's most sensitive infrastructure projects to date. I then transitioned onto TRU, which has improved my land referencing knowledge considerably, and again provided me with some lifelong knowledge in all aspects of project delivery, not only land referencing. So yeah, we'll move on to the next slide now, if you're Josh.
Brilliant. Okay, so for those of you who've been keeping up with this webinars each week, or if you're watching the replays and you've been watching it on YouTube, you'll have heard the TRU program manager Mark Chambers gave a pretty fantastic overview of the TRU scheme in last week's webinar. So based on that, I have to admit I've stolen a few of his stats for this slide's purposes. So the TRU route serves as a major link across the north of England. It stretches 76 miles between York and Manchester. The route serves 23 stations, crosses over and dips under 285 bridges, passes through 6 miles of tunnels, and crosses over 29 level crossings. So just to add on top of that as well, the government have big plans for the region as well. So whether you believe it or not, Boris has promised to make levelling up the north a top priority during his premiership. Also, Grant Shapps, the Transport Secretary, has gone one step further than his predecessor in office and made clear his strong ambitions to make the TRU route a first-class, fully electrified route. So when you consider the magnitude of the route itself, with all those stats I laid out earlier, plus the ambitions of the politicians, it's no wonder that TRU is dubbed as one of the biggest and most complex infrastructure projects within the north of England at the moment, which makes it quite an exciting project and worthy of a presentation like this on this series. But rather than going over the same thing as Mark did, for the purpose of today's presentation, we're going to be focusing on what's known as the West of Leeds route, which is everything left of the Blue Line. And the simple reason for that is that's the work that we were contracted to help out on. So this is the section of the route which we have most knowledge. So in terms of that, the West of Leeds route is split into 5 sections from Manchester to Leeds. So the tiny orange line at the bottom is the line from Manchester Victoria to Stalybridge, and this consists of electrification work and speed improvements. The tiny turquoise line next to it is capacity improvement works at Stalybridge Station. The pink line, which is the huge stretch there going over the Pennines, is from Stalybridge Station to Huddersfield. So this one's quite an interesting one because the jury is still out on this part of the route, as the previous Transport Secretary only allowed budget for electrification on 2/3 of the route. However, after Grant's recent pledge for full electrification, the debate at Network Rail is still ongoing as to what to do with this part of the scheme. And the green line, which I've highlighted there, is from Huddersfield to Dewsbury, and this is the area of focus that we're going to have on today's presentation. This segment is undergoing electrification as well as capacity improvements to move from a 2-track route to a 4-track route, thus separating slow and fast services. So Paul, I think you're just going to list through a few of those key stats on the left and what they mean.
Yeah, cheers, Josh. So just to touch on them stats briefly, so the section that we're working on, W3, consists of 1,162 land parcels. So in effect, that's 1,162 sections of land that have different ownership, if you like, and different interests. Then you move on to sort of the plots, which are defined by land acquisition types. So they're basically a development from the parcels. So one parcel can be two plots in effect. So one plot could be a permanent acquisition, whereas the other plot could be a temporary acquisition, but that is the same parcel of land in effect. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea of what them two figures are. There's 871 LIQs that have been sent out, so they're land interest questionnaires. I will touch on them a little bit later on in the presentation, but that's essentially to gain a lot of land information, so we can then import it into further documents. And we've got 9 major landowners, so they're any landowner that has 10 or more parcels of land by definition. So they're normally such as, you know, large companies or councils. But yeah, we'll move on to the next slide. Cheers, Josh.
Cheers, Paul. So the next slide is going to go over, you know, why are we doing what we're doing here? And this basically links into the Transport and Works Act Order of 1992. So, you know, there may be a handful of you on the call who can guess what a railway, tramway and a waterway guided transport system have in common. And apart from sounding like the start of a really, really bad, dull joke, they all actually require a TWA order to authorise a new scheme going ahead. So the majority of new railway and tramway schemes usually require a TWAO to be granted to proceed. However, that may not be the case if they classify it as what is called a nationally significant scheme. In this case, as per the Planning Act of 2008, a development consent order will be submitted. So the purpose of the TWA procedure is to allow the Secretary of State to make an informed view on whether the scheme is actually in the public's interest, allowing the Secretary of State to review and consider any possible objections to the scheme. So if one of these TWAOs is granted, it can provide the following powers to the body that have applied for it. So just to list a few of them, it could give an authority powers to construct or alter, operate or maintain transport systems inland or on the waterway. It gives the promoter the compulsory purchase of land or the rights to use the land. It can give them the power to close off roads and footpaths and provision of a temporary alternative route. And it also gives the body powers for making bylaws, for example, regulating the use and working of and travel and behaviour of passengers. So with most great government procedures, there is a complex process behind it. So as we've already mentioned, the purpose of the TWA procedure is to allow the Secretary of State to make an informed view on whether the scheme is in the public's interest. There's a bit of a process we've got to go through before we get to that crucial decision stage. So the first step of that is the consultation stage. So during the consultation stage, a consultation is held with all the relevant persons who are affected by the scheme, and they are consulted on how the scheme will impact them and what the scheme's development is. The next step is notices. So notices of the application must be advertised in local newspapers and also along the route of the works, on top of a direct notice being served to all the owners and occupiers affected by the compulsory purchase of their property. And when we get to the application being submitted to the Secretary of State, there are 3 possible routes that this could go down. So if there's no opposition from the public or anybody, the Secretary can make the decision. If there is an objection, the Secretary must decide within 28 days of the end of the objection period whether to hold an inquiry, and either an inquiry or a hearing normally if there are numerous objections. If not, it might be decided just to look at the written objectives. So all of that can be quite complex, and there's quite a lot of documentation on the government website around this, which is where WSP have come in to help Network Rail guide them through this process. So Paul is now going to talk you through each 4 of those stages and how WSP and the Land Services team help Network Rail on that.
Yeah, cheers, Josh. So WSP Land Services have been supporting Network Rail through this entire TWA process, really. So during the consultation phase, our stakeholder and engagement team will hold consultations with those affected by the scheme to essentially inform them of how the scheme is going to impact them. And as you can imagine, COVID has thrown this process a little bit off balance, which has pushed us to release our new virtual consultation service early. And it's been recognised throughout the business and received high praise indeed. The land referencing team are vital during the notice and application stage, gathering information on all landowners within the defined limits of the scheme, contacting landowners and major landowners to confirm their interests, issuing both direct notices to landowners and notices advertised in the local newspaper as well. A crucial part of the TWA process is proving to the Secretary of State that diligent inquiry has been carried out to contact all those affected by the scheme. If we don't adhere to the diligent inquiry regulations, the order may not be granted and the scheme could be halted at any point. So it is quite an essential thing that the land referencers do have to adhere to. And finally, the decision stage. So once the TWA has been granted, our land and property experts can then begin negotiations with the landowners to either permanently or temporarily acquire the land for the scheme. So moving on to land referencing, and I've just listed a few of the key processes really around land referencing. So the HMLR interpretation is the start of the land referencing process really, and often the most labour intensive and time consuming, and it's generally defined by the limits, which is commonly known as the red line boundary. All registered land will have its own unique title number and used to purchase plans and registers through the HMLR portal. Subsequently, the land referencers then interrogate each title and do the best to identify all the current interests that are detailed within these documents. Each title and register can vary in difficulty to interpret, and some titles can take an extremely long time to interrogate. On the right hand of the screen there is an extract from an extremely old Kirklees council title, which are the local authority in the area. And the actual title dates back to the 1800s. So after some investigation from the land referencing team and some communication with the council, we actually found out the council have employed someone specifically to interrogate and update this title, as it's so old and so difficult to interpret. So that just highlights how hard it can be at times to interrogate certain titles. Moving on to LIQs. So obviously they're known as land interest questionnaires, but the purpose of them is to essentially confirm suspected interests within the parcel that we've ascertained from doing the HMLR interpretation, identify whether any other interests are present in the parcels, such as tenants, any easements, any utilities, then to confirm contact details for future correspondence, also to confirm the boundary of the land plan that's contained within the LIQ. It's also used to help ensure the correct parties are kept informed of any developments on the scheme, and also allow people's addresses and contact details to be kept up to date. There's also land access agreements. Not all schemes use these, but TRU has used these, and they're generally completed with the landowners in order for the environmental teams to gain access to the land in order to conduct ecology surveys. This is so the ecologists can get a baseline study of what the current environmental condition of the land is, generally identifying species of animals and trees that could be impacted by the scheme. In effect, this ultimately contributes towards something that's called an EIA, which is an environmental impact assessment. This helps find mitigations to any potential environmental impacts and ultimately contributes towards the design of the project. There's two main sorts of referencing. So you get contact referencing and non-contact referencing. Contact referencing is generally following up with land interest questionnaires without with any outstanding actions really, and meeting the landowners to discuss access and survey agreements. Non-contact referencing is essentially used to understand and capture information about what is on the ground. That's not evident from, say, the HMLR interpretation or hasn't been identified within the LIQs. They're also used to determine who may own or occupy unregistered land, and non-contact referencing is used to put site notices up to help identify who may own or occupy unregistered land. Moving on to special category land, this is somewhat of a land references nightmare in some ways, and in a way it can impact a scheme considerably. Some elements of the special category land umbrella are common land and village greens, national trust land, crown land, which is land in the United Kingdom belonging to the British monarch, allotments, public open spaces, and burial grounds. And if the scheme was to impact any of these categories, some serious conversations would have to take place to either redesign the scheme or reallocate land such as public open spaces and parkland and things like that. Another difficulty that land referencers and land referencing faces is highways. So there are generally two types of highways. There's adopted and unadopted. Adopted highways are council owned and adopted by the council under Section 38 of the Highways Act. And yeah, essentially councils are responsible for maintaining these roads, which are normally the roads that we drive down, and the roads without potholes essentially. Unadopted roads are privately owned roads in which all users need to be consulted with essentially, which is a land referencer's nightmare because all parties who use the road would need to be sent an LIQ, and in some cases this can be hundreds of LIQs. So yeah, it's important for land referencers to identify if the road is unadopted or adopted. And then finally with utilities, so utility searches are normally required to identify all utility providers within the project limits and detailed in the book of reference. Later consulting with the utilities to agree on utility diversions such as sewers and pylons. However, quite uniquely on the TRU project, because we are part of the wider alliance and there's quite a few companies working on the project, a member of the alliance has actually been doing this work already, and in effect, they've been consulting with the utility providers for over 2 years. So this has been sort of noted as a collaborative success, really, and to sort of save time and money, not only from our side, but Network Rail side as well. So yeah, that has been a particular success. Moving on to the next slide, if you're Josh. So the two key deliverables that the land referencing process contributes towards is the book of reference and the land and works plans for a TWAO. The book of reference is essentially the tool that is used to submit the TWA or any order for that matter, whether it be a DCO or a CPO, and then that's submitted to the Secretary of State, containing all the landowners across the whole scheme. In order for the book of reference to be accepted by the Secretary of State, a process of diligent inquiry and due diligence must have been complied with. Although diligent inquiry is not a legally defined term, a standard has been set by previous projects within the industry, which is essentially 4 different methods of trying to contact all suspected interests within the land across the scheme. These methods are quite simple, really. You've got to prove that you've tried to contact them in every available way. So generally they are phone calls, emails, letters, site visits, site notices, and things of that nature. It's essential that we do this because during public consultation and the application, each interest gets scrutinised by the Secretary of State and PINS, which is the Planning Inspectorate. And if it comes to light that we haven't done all we can, as mentioned before, the project can be put in jeopardy. And and come under great risk. So it is the most important element of land referencing, really. Then moving on to land plans. As I discussed earlier, the limits of the scheme are generally defined by something that's called the red line boundary, which can all be referred to as the LLAU. So as you see on the diagram there, that refers to the limits of land to be acquired or used. This essentially forms the basis of all land referencing activities, but also sets out the parameters for the plan creation, containing both permanent and temporary acquisition types. We then move on to something that's the LOD, which is the limits of deviation. This generally contains only permanent acquisition types, and together they form something that's called the LACs, which is the land acquisition categories. These are then used to then split the parcels into plots that we referred to earlier, forming the start of the book of reference activity, which is one of the key deliverables for the land referencing process. So yeah, moving on to the next slide, please, Josh.
Brilliant. Okay. Cheers, Paul. Just for time purposes, we did originally have 4 of the key project challenges that we face, but we'll just stick to the first 2 for now. I'm very cautious that we've run over people's lunch break here. So the first one, which everyone is aware of, is COVID-19. So like everyone else in the world, COVID-19 has thrown us its fair share of challenges. Our office has been working from home since March. To drip back into the office. As you may have gathered from Paul's breakdown of our land referencing work, part of our work involves contacting people. So COVID threw all this out of the window. I could not visit people in person. And to be realistic, people weren't responding to our letters via post, as they weren't going to use the one walk a day to go visit the post box and return our LIQ. Therefore, we had to get a little bit innovative with our approach. So where possible, we made our approach digital. So, for example, our major landowners, we created a virtual web GIS portal, which actually allowed them to see what we see on their screen and interact with the map and confirm their land interest in certain parcels. We also created an agreement with a key printing supplier to maintain our posting during limited working hours. And it was very lucky that we used the same supplier as NHS, so they were working all the way through COVID. And where possible, we decided to do the work on behalf of local authorities and asked them to confirm what we did was right, to make sure there's no delay to the programme. So, for example, as Paul mentioned before, Kirklees Council, they've been, they've pretty much been static for the past 6 or 7 months. So rather than waiting around twiddling our thumbs for them to do the work and confirm their land ownership interest, we did it for them and just asked them to confirm that what we had assumed was right. And that's just to name a few. But this approach was heavily praised by Network Rail and actually resulted in our project team being used as a case study internally for best practice in how to keep a project on track during a crisis, which was quite well received from all of us on the team. And the second challenge that I'll touch on now was around the breadth of our international project team. So the geography of our project team draws out the perfect triangle for miscommunication, with 3 points being located in Noida in northern India, Belfast in Northern Ireland, and Manchester in Northern England. So the time zone difference with India and the strong, thick accents of Northern Irish people created a bit of a perfect storm for time delays and miscommunication of information. But nevertheless, saying that, the team has never missed a client deadline, and we haven't come across any issues in communication yet. So the reason for this will need to be analysed in a project post-mortem. However, what I can gather for this success so far is down to our use of a virtual daily stand-up first thing every morning, like they use in Agile project management. So the team leads issue out the day's tasks, and we have a general catch-up on any project queries. But more importantly, however, I think the culture of the project team is one of huge integration, so that everybody involved has a good level of understanding for each other's respective disciplines. So that means when our Indian team members log off at 2 p.m. UK time, if somebody at Network Rail sends us over a query or a message that they're not particularly sure on, our entire UK team is quite comfortable enough to answer any queries that they have. So I'll say that is it for the presentation. I hope everyone's informed. Everyone knows the plots from the parcels now, and you've had a bit of a glimpse into what's quite an underrepresented part of the engineering life cycle in the pre-application stage. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, both Josh and Paul, for that presentation. As you said, it does a big part of G4C and what we stand for is to let people know and give them insights about the whole spectrum of the built environment. And there's so many disciplines such as land services that are sometimes unfortunately forgotten. So it's great giving these opportunities just for you to tell us about them and the sort of work that you're currently doing. If you have any questions regarding either Ryan's presentation with Kier today or WSP, please email them to myself or Kieran McQuaid, who sent you the meeting invite, and we'll pass them on and hopefully get back to you. I want to say thank you to all the presenters today and all of them from the last 3 weeks. For us, this was a new challenge of implementing this webinar series, and something we think has been quite a big success. Because of this, we are hoping to do it again in the future, and I think other regions across the G4C community are looking to do similar sorts of projects. Therefore, if anyone that has attended this week or previous weeks and you have any feedback or things you think we might be able to improve, please do get in touch and let us know. Or if your company is interested in presenting in the future, either within projects for the Northwest or in any other UK regions, we could put you in touch with those area chairs and committees. So yes, thank you very much everyone for attending. Thank you to the committee for all their hard work, and thank you to all the presenters for this week and all weeks. Brilliant.